In 2014, a man by the name of Jeremy Meeks was arrested by police on felony gun possession charges in Stockton, California. But when Meeks' mugshot was posted to the Stockton PD Facebook page, the photo of Meeks went viral for an unexpected reason. Meeks was, well, hot. With high cheekbones, a chiseled jawline, and striking gray-blue eyes with a dark complexion, the 30-year-old looked much more like a male fashion model than a hardened criminal, despite having served 9 years in prison prior to this most recent arrest. And apparently, the fashion industry agreed. After serving 27 months in federal prison, Meeks' successful modeling career was launched. Now age 42, Meeks has worked with major brands, including Philip Plein, Tommy Hilfiger, and has been featured in multiple movies. At the time of this recording, he has some 1.5 million followers on Instagram. Quite the turnaround story. Now, for many people, this is a pretty remarkable and maybe even heartwarming story about a guy whose life is turned around in a pretty dramatic and unexpected way. Rare, but it happens. But for some people, the takeaway from this story, and others like it, is something dramatically different. That Meek's story is not evidence of the possibility of redemption, but evidence that the system is rigged. Rigged in favor of those with great money and power? Possibly. But rigged in favor of those with great physical attractiveness? Definitely. And there are other stories like Meek's. In fact, the more that you look into it, it's hard not to notice that highly attractive people, including highly attractive men, seem to play by a different set of rules. More likely to get the job, more likely to be promoted, more likely to get the girl, or maybe even many girls, if so inclined. A nightclub in London recently went viral for an event which allowed women and men only 6 feet tall or over who were allowed to enter, with a height check at the door, due to the perceived higher status and attractiveness of tall men. Despite the online backlash, the event proceeded and apparently was so successful, the club is planning more events with a minimum height requirement for men. Odd? Yes. Unfair? Maybe. But that's life. Society moves on. People still tend to pair off, find a match. Jobs are filled, all that. Maybe these guys get first pick in some ways. Maybe they even get a little more. But it's a big planet. Plenty for everyone to go around, right? But what if the internet and social media have fundamentally distorted the distribution of what we might call the rewards of life? Social, financial, and romantic success, taking what has historically been a slightly uneven distribution and skewing it to the point that it's virtually unrecognizable, in which the vast majority of the rewards are becoming concentrated in the hands of a small minority of highly attractive men. What then? And is this even true? Other than anecdotal stories of felon-turned-fashion models and quirky clubs in London, is there any evidence that this is the case? Well, yes, actually. Let's take the world of online dating, in which data from the apps themselves suggests that top male profiles may receive 10 to 30 times the match rate of average male profiles, and the top 10% of male profiles receive up to 58% of all the matches, according to one analysis of the data. The bottom 50%? Less than 5% of the matches. Now, maybe your inclination is to lament the fact that the world is different than you might like. You weren't born with the right height, bone structure, or eye color. These are your cards, and it's your job to play them. But maybe your inclination is to think, well, if the system is rigged for those with certain physical features, how many of these physical features are actually fixed? And if there's the possibility of changing my card, so to speak, maybe it's worth doing. And if we're willing to go beyond traditional self-improvement techniques such as diet, exercise, and body recomposition, if we're willing to consider pharmaceuticals, surgeries, and aesthetic medicine, well, the sky's the limit. As the saying goes, desperate times call for desperate measures, and what many refer to as Lookmaxxing. But even if we accept the case as presented above, that the world has fundamentally shifted in an unfair and undesirable way, when young men in their teens and 20s are turning to anabolic steroids, Botox, fillers, jaw surgeries, even limb lengthening surgeries as a means to improve their odds in life, you have to wonder, is this the result of logic or of lunacy? With that, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Unconditional with Norbie Schickel. Today we're talking about something that many of you may not be familiar with, Lookmaxxing. I'll confess that I was completely unaware of this until recently. It popped up in my YouTube feed, and I think it was a response video. And when I first heard about it, I had the same reaction that many people had, and still do have, I might add. It sounded like complete and utter insanity. But is this the case, to quote Elizabeth Holmes, where, quote, first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world, end quote. Maybe. Hasn't worked out so far in her case as of yet. But for the proponents of Lookmaxxing, and there are many, they definitely think so. And of course, Lookmaxxing is not without its critics, with reactions to the idea generally falling into either mockery or knee-jerk rejection of the basic premise. But isn't that the initial reaction to so many things that wind up changing the world? Forget the specifics of Elizabeth Holmes and the Theranos story for a second. But in many cases, the quote that I shared earlier, it's not wrong. Many of the ideas that were once radical, insane even, are now simply taken for granted as true, not to be questioned. Sometimes the line between genius and insanity, it's not so obvious. Besides, even if this new approach to male attractiveness and sexual market value is completely incorrect, a refusal to engage with the actual argument, well, that doesn't make it so. And in the specific case of Lookmaxxing, there were two things that gave me pause. First, if this is insane, why would it appear that more and more young men are turning to this and finding it compelling? Second, it turns out that much of the why behind Lookmaxxing I actually agree with, including the distortions discussed in the intro with respect to the world of dating apps and social media. This hits on many of the same themes that we discussed in our episodes on the impact of social media and smartphones on the mental health and lives of young people. In many ways, I'm a very unlikely person to be weighing in on this issue. I'm happily married, got 2 awesome kids. I've been out of the dating world for almost 2 decades at this point. But I'll tell you why I decided to make this episode. First, we're going to refer to a few videos and ideas put out by a guy who goes by Clavicular. I believe he's 19 years old. He's much closer to my son's age, much closer to my daughter's age than me. And while I am doing and will continue to do everything in my power to raise them right, I obviously care deeply about the world they will find themselves in as teenagers and young adults. This matters. Relationships matter. Getting the right romantic relationships, picking the right life partner can be a massive, massive difference in so many aspects of your life. Second, what I've seen in many of the reactions to the ideas and observations from the Lookmaxxing community is either A, ridicule, and or B, a complete lack of engagement with the actual ideas. To me, this is a mistake. Whether you agree 100% with the proposed solutions, they are describing what I believe is a legitimate issue. And if that is the case, no amount of ignorance or ridicule will make it go away. Honest engagement is the only choice. As I mentioned, for this conversation, I'm going to link to a few interviews you can find online with Clavicular. Now, he's not the first or the only person to describe, defend, or attempt Lookmaxxing, but he's been featured in some of the most watched videos on Lookmaxxing. He's very articulate on the subject. He's amassed a following on social media. And I will say this, for a guy who's like 19 years old, he is very impressive. I'll link to some of the videos in the show notes, and if you're interested, have a watch. So what exactly is looksmaxxing? There are probably several levels on which you can understand the term looksmaxxing. But in order to really wrap your head around the what, I actually think it's most helpful to first understand the why. And we're going to unravel this one step at a time. So no surprise giving the root words in the term. Looksmaxxing involves attempting to increase attractiveness and by extension desirability and attractiveness in the dating pool, sometimes referred to as sexual market value. Although looksmaxxing is not the exclusive domain of men, many of the most articulate proponents of looksmaxxing are young men. And as we'll discuss in a bit, there are some important reasons why looksmaxxing is primarily the domain of young men, at least as of the time of this recording. Now, you may be thinking, okay, so young men trying to improve their appearance, what's the big deal? Why do we need a new term? Isn't this something that young men have always tried to do? Yes, but not like this. What the looksmaxxers claim, and this is very interesting, is that while men historically have focused on improving their sexual market value by improving their financial position, by going to the gym, getting in shape, maybe dressing better, these are all a distant second to the most important factor in attracting a woman, and that is the attractiveness of a man's face. And in an age in which so much of the dating world has moved online, whether through dating apps or even Instagram, the quote payoff, so to speak, for a man with a certain type of attractive face has become even more disproportionate. So for the looksmaxxers, the traditional masculine approach, it's kind of a sucker's bet. You're placing a lot of emphasis on things that are actually quite marginal to what works in the modern dating world. Being financially secure, getting in shape, being funny, interesting, all of those things may be important, but none of these things will open doors to the dating world the way an attractive face, high cheekbones, or even physical height will. Okay, so that's interesting and all that. But even if that is correct, and we can withhold judgment as to whether that's a good or a bad thing for right now. I mean, aren't things like high cheekbones, a chiseled jawline, facial symmetry a function of nature rather than nurture? While it may be interesting to note that the dating world is showing a preference for certain features, if I can't change it anyways, what does it matter? Why not focus on the things that I can control, as opposed to lamenting the things that are beyond my control? And here's where the looksmaxxers would say, many of these things are much more within your control than most people think. From chiseled cheekbones to a more pronounced jawline, to skin tone, hair, and even eye color. Many aspects of appearance, once viewed as fixed by nature, God, or genetics, well, perhaps we're moving into a realm where many of these should be viewed more as suggestions rather than hard and fast rules, depending on how far you're willing to go. Let's start with something simple, cheekbones. High cheekbones have long been associated with increased desirability and attractiveness. Just check out any photo of a top male fashion model. You know the look. But our perception of cheekbone height is heavily influenced by body fat. The more body fat on the cheeks and face will cause the cheekbones to become less visible and less striking. So no surprise that getting lean, reducing one's body fat, can have an effect on increasing the attractiveness of the face, whether that's the explicit goal or not. If cheekbones are your thing, and let's be honest, for a lot of people they are, this can be very effective. But we can go further. Specific exercises for the tongue, jaws, even breathing over time can have a profound impact on the face. This includes mewing and the jaw exerciser, to name a few. Now, if you think that sounds a bit like bro science, let's consider something that's been known by scientists for a long time. Mouth breathing versus nasal breathing can have a profound impact on the shape of one's face. When you get a chance, just pop mouth breathing before and after into your search engine of choice, and you can see all kinds of examples of the difference that simple nasal breathing can have over time. It is profound, and you could see a lot of the same things with identical twins. One that grows up as a mouth breather and the other that grows up as a nasal breather. As I said, the difference can be profound. Let's keep in mind that this is also one of the key observations of Dr. Weston A. Price, a name we've spoken about a lot on this channel in his study of tribal populations almost 100 years ago. Same thing. Mouth breathing will change the structure of the face. Diet will change the structure of the face. Chewing hard foods. This might sound incredible, maybe even impossible in adults, but I assure you, it is not. And while I've yet to hear the importance of fat-soluble vitamins as discussed by Dr. Weston A. Price and other biological dentists make it into the Lookmaxxing lexicon, the fundamental observation that these aspects are not set in stone and in many cases can be highly influenced by our choices, they're right about this. Okay, now nasal breathing, mouth and jaw exercises, and we'll even throw in my shameless plug for certain nutritional factors. Now, what if that's not enough? How much farther can we take things? What about another, very obvious way to enhance the angularity, or at least the appearance of enhanced angularity, in the face? Well, you could use makeup. Makeup, as in what women put on their face. Yeah, that makeup. And that's not a joke. Now, this may come as a surprise to a lot of guys, but as most women know, you can drastically alter the look of one's face with the use of makeup. Don't believe me? Just pop in face contouring into YouTube or your favorite video app and check out some of the before and afters. It is wild, okay? Just wild what is possible to change or what would appear to be the actual bone structure of the face. That's to say nothing about obvious things like skin tone and blemishes. Now, if you're like me and you're having a hard time wrapping your head around the possibility of young, straight men in their teens and 20s learning to apply makeup in order to attract straight women, just sit tight. We're just at the start. The lengths that some of these guys are willing to go in order to improve their dating desirability, the word unprecedented comes to mind. Which is a good place to introduce the idea of soft maxing versus hard maxing. I think it's fair to say that everything that we've just discussed would fall into the category of what's referred to as soft maxing. Maybe the makeup strikes you as odd, but we're still talking about fairly natural, fairly non-invasive attempts to improve physical attractiveness, especially in the face. But if that's not enough, or if you're willing to consider invasive, pharmaceutical, or maybe even surgical options, we can go a lot further. Think Botox and fillers are the place of middle-aged women and some men? Think again. The world of aesthetic medicine is a very powerful lever that can be pulled in the pursuit of attractiveness. So why not? After all, as it's been pointed out, male celebrities, including big-name Hollywood actors, are willing to use all the tools at their disposal, including plastic surgery, in order to enhance their attractiveness. Take a look at Brad Pitt's iconic jawline, and then take a look at pictures on how it's changed over time. Is that all the result of natural aging and jaw exercises? Maybe. Or is there a chance that a surgeon's knife may have been involved at some point in time to guarantee the desired look? Now, if this all still sounds a bit too vanilla, or if the cost of cosmetic procedures is too high, or you just like to take matters into your own hands a bit, let's talk bone smashing, which oddly enough is exactly what it sounds like. Hitting the bones of your face with your fist or an object like a hammer, literally, to cause stress to the bone, with the aim of causing the bone to grow thicker and more prominent over time. I know, it sounds wild. Does this work? I'm not so sure that it does, but there are certainly people willing to try it. Now, we've talked about Lookmaxxing in the context of improving one's sexual market value, but it should also be pointed out that the implications are much broader than romantic life, a fact that's not gone unnoticed by the Lookmaxxing community. There are social and economic considerations as well. Attractive people tend to enjoy greater career success, ranging from a greater likelihood of getting hired to raises and promotions. And while we may like to think that we live in a society in which all people are treated equal, regardless of appearance, Hollywood is certainly not the only area of life in which appearance can have broad implications for male attractiveness. Looksmaxxers point to the obvious double standard which exists in the world, in which the exact same behavior by a man of low to average attractiveness is often perceived much differently than a man of high attractiveness. And in a post-Me Too world, the implications can be extreme. Literally the difference between harassment and welcomed attention. So let's unpack the dating world a bit more. We've already pointed to some stats that suggest the world of online dating apps is heavily skewed towards the top male profiles, with almost 60% of the matches going to the top 10 male profiles, and only 5% of the matches going to the bottom 50% of men, according to one analysis. Now, this is already not good, but it actually gets much worse. If each of these matches paired off, and say the top 10% of profiles found a mate, paired up, and then left the platform, that would be one thing. They have more options, sure, but many options still remain for the rest of the guys. But this might not be the case. A match isn't a marriage, and a date or a hookup, well, it doesn't remove that Chad from the game. He sticks around, and he gets to make another choice the next day. And because the female bench, so to speak, for his attention is 10 to 30 times that of the average guy, you get the idea. He can occupy a whole lot of attention from a whole lot of women for a long time. Assuming the, quote, dating in this case, however you define it, does not involve an actual monogamous relationship or faithful marriage. Let's not be naive. That's a lot of what goes on in dating apps. Don't shoot the messenger. It's just true. This skews the distribution even further, so to speak. The twin forces of promiscuity and hypergamy are key drivers here. In addition to an unprecedented ability through the use of technology for the Chad in this case, right, the top males, so to speak, to reach and to woo women literally across the globe on dating apps, sure, but also on social media apps like Instagram. Now, promiscuity and hypergamy, this is nothing new. The desire to date and pair, quote, above one's status, whether in wealth or looks or social status, this has been common throughout history. But of course, real physical limitations on communication, on travel, these were all gating factors, not to mention moral teachings across almost every society throughout recorded history. There is a reason that the nuclear family, a duty-bound, monogamous relationship with parents and children, has been the bedrock of so many civilizations. Marriage and children have not only been a stabilizing effect on young men, arguably the most potentially dangerous demographic in society, but on society as a whole. And I'm not pointing these things out to be judgmental here. Hey, given my background as having been raised as a Christian and having been born in the United States, like many people in this country, it's tempting to think that these ideas are like a Western or a Christian thing, but it isn't. In China, for example, there's been a long-running preference for male offspring as opposed to female. Gender-specific abortion was, I believe still is, sadly common, which leads to an obvious gender imbalance and historical imbalances in marriage and children. The population of non-married, permanent bachelors, they refer to as guangan, which literally translates to bare sticks. Okay, you can use your imagination there. But all throughout imperial China, this group was responsible for all sorts of revolt and civil unrest. More recently, with the one-child policy, that gender imbalance reemerged. And this again has been identified as a major threat to the stability of the country. This is certainly not an American or a Western or a Christian phenomenon. Although the drivers are different, the effect could be similar in many countries. Now, do I think there's a strong likelihood that an army of incels is going to rise up and overthrow civilization anytime soon? Maybe not, but just objectively, right? Just thinking about this from the perspective of society as a whole, I don't see how this is a good thing. And you don't have to reach for religion or morality to wrap your head around this. I don't. I have a simple test, a simple check, if you will. that tries to keep me honest about my own behavior. And I'll tell you what it is. I simply ask myself, is this something that I would want my son doing? Or is this something that I would want my daughter doing or to be involved in? And if the answer is no, I probably shouldn't be involved in it. And if I were going to have my child thrown into a society in which 10% of the men are getting 60% of the women, I don't want that. Even if there's a chance that my son is in the top 10%, it's not a good society. And I certainly don't want my daughter anywhere near that train wreck, right? Not even close. No, thank you. But whether you agree with me or not, if this is the world we're living in, what does it matter? Like I said from the start, in many ways, these guys and girls are caught between a rock and a hard place. So while, of course, I can't solve this, no single person can, I am optimistic about this being solved in the future. Okay, I'll give you my perspective here and let me know what you think. Now, because this is a health and fitness podcast, I'm going to weigh in on that aspect first. Okay, I'll give you my sense on broader societal implications for what it's worth and how I might think about this as a young man, or if my son were to come to me when it's age appropriate for advice. But let's discuss the health implications first, because these are significant. I am all for getting lean, getting ripped, going to the gym, and improving your physical attractiveness through natural means. No disagreement that in some cases, this can radically alter the look of your face and improve your sexual market value. No argument there. Okay, I can personally attest to this. Getting lean did significantly change my look, and people did start to treat me differently. Not just women, but men as well. Now, we can say this isn't great, that society should treat people equally regardless of appearance. But we know that while that may be an admirable goal, certainly something to aspire to, and to teach your children, this doesn't always happen. And there may actually be a good reason for this, because certain traits, a lean, muscular physique, chiseled jawline, straight teeth, high cheekbones, and striking eyes, they are an indicator of good nutrition during development, physical strength and endurance, and high testosterone. In other words, the ability to protect, provide, and procreate in the traditional sense. This is nothing new. Check out Greek statues of idealized men like David or of the Greek gods. Statues completed thousands of years ago, and they are shockingly similar to what most of us have as an idealized form of a man today. Now, do I completely get that we no longer live in the world of hunter-gatherers or of chariot drivers? Sure. But these things are attractive because of what they signify to our biology, not the other way around. Aiming to simulate these features, right, these masculine attributes, these virtues that are signified in physical form, well, it's just that. It's a simulation. It's a poor proxy, an artificial proxy for the real thing. And yeah, of course, some are thinking, sure, but what does that matter? If it gets me in the door, if I have more options in a partner, whether I choose to settle down or not, why would more options be a bad thing? And why struggle to make gains naturally that can be attained easily with medical or pharmaceutical interventions? In a statement that I've seen a lot of people comment on, Clavicular said something to the effect of that he hates going to the gym, right? Or he finds it boring, something to that effect. Like, why would you want to ride the same roller coaster over and over again with a bunch of sweaty guys? It's kind of funny. And I do find it interesting that this is a guy who's been open about taking testosterone since the age of, I believe, 14. Now, this was done under the assumption that it may make him taller, may have helped masculinize his face, right, in addition to the muscle growth benefits. Honestly, I'm not so sure about those claims. I've actually seen data that would suggest the opposite, that a lack of testosterone in some cases with males can actually cause them to grow taller. And even if you just look at male heights over time, I think the delta, and I don't have this in front of me, but it's like he's an inch taller than his dad or something to that effect. But there are many, many, many men who are an inch taller than their fathers, right? Especially if you look at heights over time. So I'm not sure about these claims. We can just leave those for now. But even if that were the case, why would you choose the natural, slower, path as opposed to maybe the more guaranteed, the faster path with pharmaceuticals, with surgery, right, with drugs. You can accelerate your gains, right? Work smarter, not harder, all that. And we did just wrap up an entire episode on how to raise your testosterone naturally. So if you haven't given that a listen, definitely check it out. But here are a couple things to think about. Yes, it is true that exogenous testosterone has been around since the 1930s and that we've had decades of scientific study, of real-world data, and of, let's be honest, personal experiments with these compounds, however you want to call it. But here's what we don't have. Any of that with young people, right? With teenagers, with 20-somethings who are in the absolute prime of their lives and should be absolute testosterone-making powerhouses. And if they aren't, and as we discussed previously, testosterone levels have dropped and would appear to be dropping dramatically in young men, then something is way, way off. Is the solution just to ignore what's broken and simply band-aid over the problem with a lifetime dependency on pharmaceuticals? Testosterone is the closest thing to a superpower that we humans have. I mean, literally. Faster recovery, more muscle growth, better focus and energy, not to mention sex drive and performance. And your body is designed to make it. Like a lot of it, especially if you're a young man. And you're going to kneecap yourself for the rest of your life and depend on drug companies? I don't know. It just boggles the mind. Like, why would you give that up? And if you're thinking, yeah, but, the toxins in the water, the food, the pesticides, all this other stuff, the endocrine disruptors, the plastics, BPA, all that, it can't be done. I assure you that it can. Okay, I'll be 42 years old this month, and my testosterone was recently measured at 950. Okay, and I'm not some genetic freak. That's almost 200 points higher than it was 10 years ago. Okay, it is possible. If you're interested in how, I'll plug that previous episode. Go check out that last episode. Exogenous testosterone may have similar effects in the gym and in other areas of your life, but it is clearly not the same thing. And we know that it's self-evident because of its effect on fertility. Before you reach for that injection as a quick way to build muscle or thinking it's going to improve the structure of your face, you need to know that. Real testosterone, the kind your body makes, it boosts fertility. Pharmaceutical testosterone, it kills fertility. Doesn't that strike you as odd? There is a reason why reputable doctors will only consider TRT for men who are past the point of having kids. And this is getting completely lost in the conversations around the benefits of testosterone in young people, right? And young guys in particular. I've said this before, but even if you think you don't want kids, why would you give up the option, right? Perspectives change all the time. When I was in my teens and 20s, I knew for a fact that I did not want to have kids. Didn't want them. Now I can't imagine life without them. I think they're the best. I wouldn't give it up for the world. Is it a guarantee that it will be the same with you? No, of course not, right? But it's been that way for many, many people, and there is an obvious reason for it. The pull of the biological imperative is incredibly strong, right? Some would argue, and I would agree, it's the reason we're here. And infertility can be a tremendous strain on a relationship, on a marriage, right? That's just my 2 cents. If you are young, do not throw this away carelessly. Okay, huge mistake. I also want to speak to this idea of accelerating your gains, right? Now, this is more of a nuanced point here. I'll try to do it justice. In general, we all want what we want as fast as we can get it. We want the money. We want the girl. We want the success. However we define it, we want these things as quickly as we possibly can get them. And most of them are important. No denying that. But I'll tell you what is critical. Absolutely not negotiable, essential for any life. From my perspective, that is fulfillment and purpose. We need a reason to strive. And sometimes when we get what we want immediately or with little effort, it loses its meaning. And we lose interest, of course. Now I'm painting with a broad brush here, and I know that there is a Goldilocks zone, right? Too much struggle without success isn't great, but immediate success without effort isn't either. But it might not be a coincidence that guys who have used PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs, from a young age, after a certain point in time, they begin to lose interest in the gym. And trust me, the implications of this are much broader than lifting weights. There was another clip that popped up in my feed, a little short. I'll see if I can dig it up and add to the show notes. But it was with David Lade. Hey, David Lade is a guy who's built this legendary physique at a very young age, right? A guy who many in the Lookmaxxing community was holed out as like a Chad or maybe even a Giga Chad. But interestingly, he said that after he achieved his dream physique, after a few years of hard work, and you can see this, right? I mean, he goes from like a scrawny 14-year-old kid to like just this incredible physique by like age even 15. I mean, I saw a picture, if it's to be believed, of the difference between him at age 14 versus age 15. And it's just unbelievable, right? Unbelievable. But interestingly, he said that after he had achieved his dream physique, after a few years of hard work, and if you look at the photos, I think we can assume some PED use just based on the time and how rapid the development was and the age. He said he felt empty and that the attainment was disappointing, right? Like where's the rest? Like, is this all that there is? Now, of course, this is as much a statement on our foolish insistence on the achievement of a goal as the path to sustained happiness and fulfillment. And like so much of the wisdom of the past tries to guide us towards the fact that it is the journey and not the destination. Instant, rapid gratification, the attainment of a goal is not a path to sustained happiness. If it were, pornography would be the cure for depression in young men. And if anything, it's the complete opposite, right? We all know that. We can all see that. Now, we've talked a bit about testosterone, but let's talk about pharmaceuticals in general here, right? Because within the context of Lookmaxxing, there's a whole lot that is being considered and is being used in some cases, right? Clavicular being a good example. In this particular interview, he's asked about what drugs, what pharmaceuticals and substances he's taking. And I remind you, before I go into it, he's 19, right? This is a 19-year-old man. And I'll just say it strikes me as a pretty long list. So 1, testosterone for performance in the gym. And he ticks off all of his doses. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that here. But again, check out that video if you're interested. So first, testosterone, performance in the gym. And he's been clear. He's been taking it since 14. I also find it very interesting that when he ticked off his dose, and I just said I wasn't going to talk about doses. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he said that he tries to keep it at a dose and a frequency to be as natural as possible. I just find this so odd. Again, a 19-year-old, if you're not looking for super physiological doses of testosterone or something that is unnatural, I mean, I'm just puzzled, right? You have the natural dose of testosterone. It is your own body. Why would you need a pharmaceutical intervention? I'm just baffled. But anyways, you know where I'm coming from, but I'll just say that. Hard not to editorialize at some points. So 1 is testosterone, 2, minoxidil for hair, 3, dutasteride for hair, Accutane for anti-aging, 5, crystal meth, yes, as a stimulant and also to support lean maxing as it's an appetite suppressant. And he's funny about it. I give him credit because it's a really good hook where he talks about he uses crystal meth for hollow cheeks. And, that's partially true. It's a slightly different form of methamphetamine than street meth, what people are smoking. But still interesting. And, still a very, very powerful drug from what I understand. Retatrutide, something that's definitely being talked about a lot more online and people are using and experimenting with in order to get a very, very lean look. And he's clear about the fact that he takes an extremely high dose, which he says, this could be problematic, right? Maybe not great for my health over the long run and wouldn't recommend it. 7, melanotan, IGF-1, HGH. Okay, and I guess you could say that would be sort of the work, the productivity, the gym performance stack. But we got 2 more. Okay, we've got the recreational side, and that includes pregabalin and baclofen. Okay, these are two drugs that are used to help lower inhibitions, right? To make you less inhibited when it comes to social settings, just to sort of calm you down, right? Similar to alcohol in the way that it sort of lowers the inhibitions, but hopefully with fewer neurotoxic effects, fewer effects on the liver, and fewer gym tanking and performance in the gym tanking qualities as alcohol. Now, for those keeping track at home, that is 11 drugs. Okay, 11. As I said, 9 for performance and looks, and 2 that are recreational, right? And this is at age 19. And as I hear this and as I heard this, I just keep asking myself, like, and all of this is to avoid what exactly? Eating whole foods, working out, drinking quality water? But maybe you don't buy what I'm saying, or maybe you've tried all that, to be fair, and those things didn't work and you're still looking for more. And I will say, and again, credit where credit is due. This is a guy who is clearly well read on these chemicals. He's clearly intelligent, clearly very knowledgeable on the uses, the doses, the side effect, all of that. Okay, it'd be impressive for anybody, but it's especially impressive for a guy his age. But I just have to point out, and unless I'm missing something, this is ironclad. None of these drugs, certainly not this entire stack of drugs taken for long periods of time from a very young age, have ever been studied in conjunction with one another. Maybe the side effects for one drug, maybe even negative interactions between the two common drugs, right, taken in combination, immediate reactions, right, allergic reactions, that sort of thing. But 9 to 11 drugs taken all at once, all at the same time, it's impossible, right? We don't know, and we couldn't possibly know what the implications of this are stretching out over decades until it's too late. And if I recall, when asked about this, whether he had concerns about the impact of these drugs or just on his life and longevity, he said something to the effect of, I'm not much of a longevity guy. Okay, fair point. But anyone considering this or something like this should do so with eyes very wide open. But my overall point here is that rather than simulating all of these attributes through the use of pharmaceuticals, why not actually build them? I'm not naive here. There will always be those who will choose what appears to be the immediate over the progressive. But if you are at all wary of the implications of stacking these things, your hesitation is wise, okay? Focus on building the real instead of the simulation. Build real confidence and low inhibition instead of pharma-induced affectation. Produce actual testosterone instead of some inferior lab-based alternative as your body's designed. Because it's not just a simple either or. It's actually more like choosing the simulated destroys the real, right? Synthetic testosterone kills real testosterone. Using drugs to reduce anxiety can have the effect of increasing anxiety over time, right? We discussed this in the context of alcohol. I don't know if this makes any sense to anybody else, but this is just where my brain goes on this. To me, it's kind of like you could choose between immediately looking like you could fight, right? Super tough, super scary. But by doing so, it would destroy your ability to defend yourself and your family versus spending years in the gym, learning striking, grappling, and maybe even weapons training. Or, maybe like another example would be you simulated the appearance of financial wealth and security by running up a credit card balance in the short run, but it's actually destroying your ability to create true wealth and financial security over your lifetime. I don't know. Maybe that makes me a normie, but to me, this just seems obvious. To me, these proxies are just terrible substitutes for the real thing. And not only that, it's worse. They're destroying the real thing in the process. I think we should be very, very cautious about that and go into this eyes wide open. Now, I know this episode has gone on longer than expected, and I probably should stop saying that because, let's be honest, that is all of the episodes, but I want to weigh in on one last thing. I want to weigh in on the social and the dating aspect here, a little bit out of the realm of what I typically talk about in the show, but this topic is so fascinating because it touches so many things, right? It touches the health, the fitness, it touches the social, it touches the parenting, all topics that are near and dear to my heart. And it's odd that this one subject sort of has its webs reached out so far and wide. But we discussed the incredibly uneven distribution in dating apps, right? This challenge that is at the core, I think, of Lookmaxxing. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's not just between top male profiles and the bottom male profiles, right? It's not just that 10% of the top male profiles are getting 60% of the matches. The bottom 50% are only getting 5% of the matches. But there's also a massive delta between matches between men and women, right? Men are much more likely to select a wider range of women than the reverse. And of course, this has also been interpreted by many as evidence of stronger hypergamy in women as opposed to men, all right? These are crude terms here, but let's take a man who is, say, like a 10. He might be willing to hook up with women, or maybe a 7, 8, 9, or 10, right? Maybe even lower. But for a woman who's, say, a 7, maybe she's only willing to date men who are at least a 7 and above, right? Something to that effect, right? It's crude, I get it, but you understand the point. Now, you combine that with what's been described as more rampant promiscuity on the part of women, and you get how this can be perceived as a system that is almost rigged against the average guy. Right? There have always been Chads and Giga Chads willing to take as many women as they can get, right? Genghis Khan sort of thing. But now, with dating apps and maybe looser morals on the part of some women, the situation has become dramatically worse. And many guys are getting left behind. But there's something incredibly important missing from this equation that provides much needed context to this situation and that I don't see being talked about. And that is that men massively outweigh women on dating apps. By some estimates, on, say, Tinder, for example, it's 3-1. For every one woman on the platform, there are 3 men. So if we're being honest, and of course we should be, we really need to unpack this. By some estimates, the match rate for men on average is something like 3%. Right? This is just across the board. But the match rate for women is around 30%. Okay, so while the straight math has the discrepancy at like 10x, this is a shocking number. When you factor in the difference ratios between the two genders, the discrepancy falls to something like 3x. But a 3x delta in matches, still not nothing. So what sense can we make of this? Isn't this still evidence that women are into hypergamy and hookup culture? Maybe. Or is it evidence that certain women, i.e. the ones using specific dating apps, are into hookup culture and hypergamy? I may be going out on a limb here, but I think it's fair to assume that users of apps like Tinder, they all kind of know the deal, right? Hooking up and hypergamy, however you want to describe it, it is a feature of the app, not a bug. And the fact that some women are into it, okay, sure. But the fact that men massively outnumber the women on the platform is an indicator of either A, that this is an incredibly poor choice for men who are not looking for that, and or B, proportionally far fewer women seem to be interested in that than men. I mean, if only 25% of the users on, say, Tinder are women, it would appear that this is a minority of women. I mean, I may be missing something, but it seems fairly obvious to me. To that point, if you look at data for sites like eHarmony and Match.com, sites that cater to older demographics, which may have a different set of dating objectives, and again, no judgment here, the ratio of men to women on the platform is closer to 50-50. And the match rates, although they're measured a bit differently, again, are close to parity. But Match.com and eHarmony are a bit more about finding long-term relationships than they are finding a date for the night. That might tell us something. So, in my bit of humble, completely unsolicited friend advice, feel free to agree, completely disagree, right? Just can it if it doesn't help. My sense is to know which game you're playing. If your aim is to be some giga chad on a platform like Tinder or Instagram, getting your choice of a new date for each day of the week, a lifetime dependency on pharmaceuticals, on plastic surgery, on limb lengthening surgeries, Botox fillers, and let's be honest, the complete evisceration of your masculine hormones, maybe that's required, maybe not, but it might be worth it for some. But if that's not your aim, and if the aim is simply to solve the challenge that men and women have faced for millennia, to find a life partner, someone to create a family and to create memories with, and to face this insane world together and to be better for it, maybe placing your efforts outside of certain dating apps is a much better play. Maybe approaching what would appear to be a majority of women who are not on Tinder or whatever the equivalent is going to get you closer to the objective. Just a thought. No judgment either way, but my point is to know what you're going for and to choose your strategy and your efforts accordingly. And let me go ahead and plug the real world so much more, right? I think the thing that continues to get lost in this story, and I've said this before, but I agree that the dating apps, certain ones in particular, are likely strongly biased against the average man. But the conclusion to that for me is stop playing the rigged game, especially if that's not what you're about. Put your efforts back into the real world. Okay, we did a full long episode on social media and on smartphones and how these two devices, right, these two technologies, the change in these technologies that occurred in 2010. I'll go ahead and plug the excellent book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt again. If you have not read it, remedy that. Okay, hugely important. One of the top books I think that you can read in this day and age for anybody interested in understanding some of this insanity and coming up with solutions for it. But my strong advice would be to place your efforts in the real world. Now, of course, I say this as a guy coming to you over the virtual world, right? But I'm constantly shocked by the difference that my own lived experience reflects in the real world versus the online world. In the real world, people are incredibly polite. People are nice. People are reasonable. I've rarely heard or seen people screaming at each other in the real world. But in the online world, this happens all the time. You know, people have said it. Twitter is a cesspool. I think there's something to be said about that. And I really, really believe that the more that we can encourage young people to get outside, to get into the real world, to take real risks. And I get it. Dating apps, there's some comfort there. You know, the fear of rejection, all of that. The stakes in some ways on swiping on somebody are incredibly low. So there's no surprise that men are willing to swipe a whole bunch and not as many women, right, because the stakes are higher, are willing to swipe in return, in addition to all the other reasons that we just talked about. Okay, I totally get that. But while I continue to hear so much about the challenges of young people in the online world, for many of the young people that I know in the real world that spend a lot of their time focused on the real world, these challenges are not nearly as extreme. So I'll go ahead and plug The Anxious Generation. I did an entire episode on Adventure is the Antidote. That would be another good one if this is all rings a bell. And of course, if Lookmaxxing is for you, you know, maybe I've given you a couple of things to think about, maybe some things to rage against and get upset about, you know, but either way, my heart is in a good place. I want the best for the society. I want the best for young people. You know, I want the best for my own kids coming up. And like I said, I recognize the incredibly challenging and unprecedented times that we're in. If you have enjoyed this conversation, I would certainly appreciate a like, a share, a subscribe, a comment. Tell me it's crazy. Tell me I'm missing something. All that, all good. But thanks for the listen, and I will see you next time.